Hey guys, I am the Comics Kid 2099 and I'm here to talk about a book, X-Men 2099 Volume 1. By the way, I'm still sick. If you saw yesterday's video where I sounded like I had a balloon inflated in my head, I am still sick, but I'm just gonna soldier right through this video, and if I sound sick the entire time, then it's because I'm sick. I mentioned earlier this week in my haul video about what I got and what I did at Free Comic Book Day that I was going to be talking about a 2099 book, and this is it. This is the first 9 issues of X-Men 2099. If you are not familiar with this world, first of all, naturally, I'm a huge fan of it because my username is named after this universe, this little section of the Marvel Universe. What you should first know is that it started in the early 90s, like 93, 92, something like that. Probably 93, I think. And there were 4 series. There was Spider-Man 2099, Doom, Punisher, and Ravage. Ravage being the first original character, and he was actually co-created by Stan Lee. Fun little fact. And then about 10 issues later, all of those series started within like 2 months of each other. So they were all almost about the same issue number. About 10 issues later, you got this series, X-Men 2099. And this is a very interesting experience for me, rereading all this, because almost all of the 2099 stuff, I have not read it since I was like 13, and it's been a long time since I read a lot of that stuff. I know I did a video where I talked about one issue of Ghost Rider 2099. This was probably within the last year. But for the most part, I have not read a lot of this stuff. I've read it, but then it's been a long time since I've reread it. And so like with this, I read the first 9 issues. I was expecting this to be one of those things where you remember something from your childhood or your early teenage years very fondly, and then you go back and you rewatch it or you reread it, and you do not have the same experience, and you are very disappointed. I was expecting that, and I think to a degree I was right to expect that. But I was actually very surprised by what I read here. First, I want to talk about the bad. If you are at all familiar with the 1990s and comic books and superheroes from the 1990s, one of the things that is very popular from 1990s comic books is, let's take some really grim and gritty words and put them together and you have a name. For example, on this book here, Bloodhawk, because of course his name is Bloodhawk. Mean Streak, where's Mean Streak? This guy right here, Mean Streak, Skullfire. These are very 1990s comic book names. They, to a degree, yes, they do describe these characters, but also it just feels like they took some really grim and gritty words and just spliced them together, and then they created a character from those names. I don't want to say that that is what happened, because there's actually a lot of good stuff in this book, but that did feel very excessive. Like, I was reading about the 2099 universe, reading some people talking about what they felt about the 2099 comics, and one guy was saying he felt like it was, or at first he felt like it was just a place for all of the bad excesses of the 1990s to go and be turned up to 11. I think that's what he said. I was expecting that here. To a degree, that's what's going on, but also it's good, and I keep saying that maybe I should actually talk about the good. And so, what is some of the good here? I think it's very interesting that John Francis Moore is the writer of all of this, and I get the feeling that he was continuously trying to tweak this series and find something that worked. And that's sort of strange, because in a way I think that works here, and in a way it doesn't. The first 3 issues is sort of the origin for the team, but the problem that I have here is that these guys very rarely act like a team. After the 3-issue origin for this team, we have 3 characters who immediately, they go off and do their own thing. And I should point out that early on, like within the first year of the 2099 comics, there was a crossover between all 5 of the series called Fall of the Hammer. And Part 3 is collected here. Issue 5 of this series was Part 3 of that crossover. So it does that thing that I kind of hate, where you read the first 4 issues of this book and then you get a page of text explaining what happened in the first 2 parts of the Fall of the Hammer crossover, and then you get the issue and then you get another page of text explaining what happened in the rest of the crossover. And I really hate that. I really wish they would have just collected the Fall of the Hammer crossover, because they've now done 2 of the Spider-Man 2099 books, and another part of that crossover is collected in Spider-Man 2099 Volume 2. I really just wish they would do a sort of small trade collecting all 5 parts of that crossover, and maybe like 1 or 2 other issues that kind of deal with the prologue and aftermath. I really wish they would do something like that, because this issue of the crossover actually stands well on its own. If I had just read issue 3, or part 3 of the Fall of the Hammer crossover, which I did, I didn't read any of the other parts while I was reading this. I read the Fall of the Hammer crossover years ago. I only read part 3 of that crossover, and I thought it stood very well. It more or less flows from issue 4 into issue 5 and then back into issue 6. It's a little bit problematic in that you have characters like the Punisher, Spider-Man, and Ravage. They are showing up in this issue, and it's like, whoa, where did these guys come from? But again, I guess you have to read those pages explaining what's happened in the rest of the crossover. But for the most part, this was a very good example of how to do a part of a crossover, where just in case someone else is not interested in reading the rest of the crossover, you have this issue that still more or less works as a standalone piece. I thought that was very good. But then you have immediately after the pilot episode, where the 3 issues kind of establishing this team, then you have 3 of these guys go off and do their own thing. Then they come back, and then they have an adventure where they meet this group of synthetic mutants called the Degens. And one of our characters, Metalhead, this Colossus ripoff guy right here, he gets infected by one of the Degens, and he gets really muscular, really huge, and he loses all of his hair, and he thinks he looks like a freak, which it's weird because he doesn't exactly look pretty here, but he was able to turn from human to metal and back to human. After he's infected, he's no longer able to turn back into a human, so then he stays with the Degens. And then these guys, they all go and they meet a previous team of X-Men led by Master Zhao. And basically, I get the feeling that John Francis Moore, he put together this team, but then he was never really happy with the way the team gelled. So he was always trying to find ways to make this team work. For example, Skullfire, who, by the way, he looks like a member of KISS, but he does not look like that in the comics. He doesn't have the makeup or anything like that in any of these issues. It's like issue 12 before he starts looking like that. So it's really weird that on the cover of issue 1, that's what he looks like, and then it's a full year before that's what he looks like in the comics. That's very strange. But anyway, Tim Fitzgerald, Skullfire, when he's first introduced, he is basically the Jean Grey or Kitty Pryde or Rogue of the X-Men, and that he is the brand new character who is just joining these guys, and along with him, the audience is finding out what's going on. He is said to be, several times, he is said to be innocent and very wide-eyed. He doesn't really know what's going on. He's very taken aback by all of this. Well, then, issue 4, I think, he is tampered with by a psychic vampire named La Lunatica, and she kind of messes with his mind, and after that, he's basically just insane. He's doing stupid stuff that is a risk to his own life, a risk to other people's lives, and I get the feeling that John Francis Moore, once again, he introduces this character, and then he's like, no, I don't really like what I did there. I'm going to change it immediately. And it's good that a writer sees what he feels to be flaws in his series, and he wants to change those flaws. He wants to make this stuff work together. What's problematic is that this series, after 9 issues, it doesn't feel like it's really found its footing yet. Because he is constantly tweaking this stuff, it feels like it's a 9-issue pilot that hasn't really taken off yet. And I think that's a problem, but at the same time, I really enjoyed myself here. There's a lot here that is very enjoyable, and I think part of that might be nostalgia, but part of it, I think this is an actually good series. I think this is definitely something I would give to somebody. I would say, Bear in mind, this was made in the 1990s, so there is a lot here that you probably won't see, and you won't like it a whole lot. It's very 90s-y, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Bear in mind that is an aspect of this book, but I would still say it's very enjoyable. I enjoyed myself. I really wish there was a volume 2 to this. As far as I know, there's not one. There may be one because just a few months ago, Marvel did a volume 2 for Spider-Man 2099. So it's very possible that they are planning on doing more 2099 trades. I very much hope that they do because I really enjoyed this. It does have a few problems here and there, but I think the pros definitely outweigh the cons. And in actuality, I think this series only gets better after issue 9. So if you are somehow able to find the other issues of this series, I would suggest reading those because I think the series, it gets better as it goes along. I think that comes from John Francis Moore realizing once he has something that works, it works, and he doesn't have to keep tweaking that. He does keep tweaking the series as it goes along, but for the most part, I think once he found something that worked, he would keep it there, and he would keep working with that aspect that worked. I almost wish that this series, instead of being called X-Men 2099, I wish it was called Mutant 2099, or Mutants 2099, because this, like I said, these guys don't really work together as a team. We see them working together a little bit, but I think this series would have worked better if it was just about these 10 or so mutants across the world of 2099 and how they all interact with each other. And you can even have them working together as a team when the occasion calls for it. But like, you have 3 issues here where 3 of these guys are off doing their own thing and we don't see any of the others. That would have been a good example where if you had just called this series Mutants 2099, then you would not feel the need to have included those other people. You would not feel like their absence is as noticeable because in those 3 issues, you're still reading about mutants from the year 2099. You're just not seeing all of them. I think, in a way, if this was kind of sort of like Heroes Season 1, where these guys, they know each other, but they're not really a connected team, I think that might have been a better choice for this book. But it's a moot point because this series is like 20 years old and there's nothing that can change what's been done now. I enjoyed this book a lot. I would suggest that you read this. Bear in mind, it's not perfect. It was made in the 1990s, so there are going to be some 90s things about this book. But overall, I think it will surprise you if you just give it a chance. So that's all I have to say. I am going to end this video now. I hope that I get to feeling better. I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. And I will see you guys later in the week with a different kind of review. So I will see you guys then. Have a good one.